Hello everyone, I'm Dovlet, and in this video, I'll be going over the radio procedures. So if you found this video useful, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. So let's get started. So the importance of this lesson. So there's basically two main things, right? Firstly, radio communication is a key aspect of aviation, right? Either you are trying to be a pilot or you're trying to be ATC. Either way, those are really important. Like radio communications are very important aspects of those jobs. So like the term they always say in aviation is like the first is like aviate, navigate, and communicate, right? Like communicate is literally like the third most important thing when it comes to flying a plane. So radio communication is a very key aspect of that. And other thing is that it is also required knowledge for the Industry Canada Restricted Operator Certificate with Aeronautical Qualification. That's a really long name, ROCA, which is basically a certificate that allows you to operate a radio on board an aircraft and as an ATC controller. So yeah, it's pretty important if you want to pursue those, those things in life. So let's get started. The first teaching point is teaching point 1, explain priorities and privacy. So let's first go over priorities. So when there's a channel of radios, like you listen in, prior to when you're talking, you listen in and making sure nothing like big is happening. So whenever you're trying to talk through the radio, you want to make sure you know the priorities of the radio. So the first priority is number 1, emergencies. So if you see if you hear there's an emergency happening and your message is not an emergency, please don't say your thing. Okay. So emergencies includes distress and urgency communications. These are your mayday calls, your pan calls, and your security calls, right? So those are like the 3 types of calls that are like the top priorities. The second is flight safety communications. So flight safety communications are basically like ATC communications. Like maybe ATC says that Foxtrot Golf Romeo, you are cleared to land on runway 23 or something like that. Like those are ATC communications. Those are flight safety communications. Those take second priority. Another thing is airport advisories. Maybe one of the runways have debris on it for whatever reason. Those would be airport advisories, like the ATC or like ground control telling you that there might be some problems on the runway and you might want to be avoiding those parts of the airport. So those would be airport advisories. Okay, the third thing is scheduled broadcasts. So the most popular, these are probably METARs. So hourly weather reports, right? They are sent out by weather stations every hour, on the hour, and they're just basically like weather reports telling you what are the wind speeds, wind directions, where the clouds at, how high they are, how much there is, stuff like that. Like there will be a much more in-depth version video about how to read METARs. These are actually pretty fun puzzles to read if you're like really into those kind of stuff. And number 4, unscheduled broadcasts. So unscheduled broadcasts are like pilot weather reports, which is basically when the pilot is flying and there's some unexpected meteorological thing happening. Maybe it is unexpected turbulence, or maybe it's like there's suddenly a like other things that are like unexpected that wasn't previously mentioned by ATC or METARs that you as the pilot you experience. You would broadcast it as a pilot weather report. And TAFs. So TAFs are basically, again, like unscheduled METARs. They're basically unscheduled METARs. They're, again, weather reports that are less, they're broadcasted by weather stations when there is a sudden change of weather between each METAR. Okay, so maybe this METAR comes out every hour, and from maybe like 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, there like during like 6:25, there's suddenly like a really big change in wind speed or wind direction. Then they will issue a TAF to tell you about that, right? So those are the priorities. And then next up is privacy. So privacy is basically just a law stating that no person shall reveal the contents or the existence of communications transmitted, received, or intercepted by a radio station. Now, there is a lot of caveats to this rule, so there's a lot of exceptions. The first exception is the message receiver. So if the receiver wants to reveal it, they can reveal it. If the government of Canada, like the authorized officials of the government of Canada wants to reveal them for whatever reason, maybe like as an example of what not to do or what to do, either way, like whatever reason they have, if they want to reveal it, they can reveal it. Another thing is officers of the court. So if the court needs to hear it for whatever reason, they can hear it. And also operators of the radio necessary to forward the message. So in certain situations, there might be a message that like you need someone to relay the information to. So it's not like a direct messaging. It's like you need to have a middleman as a person to forward the information. So that person can also forward the message, right? And also these restrictions also don't apply to emergencies. So if it is an emergency situation, it's a mayday or pan security, whatever it is, you don't need to follow these rules, okay? So if there's a mayday and for whatever reason another flight doesn't know about the mayday, you can tell them like there's a mayday happening. All station addresses. So stuff like weather reports or storm warnings are things that you can also reveal without worrying about breaking the law, okay? Okay, next up is teaching point 2. Explain time, date, and transmission of numbers. So firstly, let's go over time. So for time, when it comes to radio communication of time, we usually expresses it using 4 figures, okay? So the first 2 digits are the hours past midnight, and the like the third and fourth digit is the minutes past hour. So for example, 12:45 a.m. we'll say it is 00:05. So again, when we say these numbers, we use like the phonetic spelling of numbers, and also we change it back to like not these spellings. Like we started from like 00 to all the way to 23, right? So that's how you do it. Another example of like 4:07 p.m. we would do it as 1607. Okay, so that's an example. And finally, for UTC time, or also known as Greenwich Mean Time or Zulu time, we do it as like a thing at the end. So for example, 5:39 a.m. Zulu time, we say it as 0539 Zulu. Okay, so that's how we say time. And also another thing about dates. So dates again is like the 2 is the day and the rest of them are the time. Okay. Transmission of numbers. So transmission of numbers is, some of them are pretty straightforward, some of them not so much. So when we're just talking about normal numbers, each digit is pronounced separately except for whole thousands and hundreds. Okay, so for example, this is like normally we say it's 8,000. So if you say like phonetically, it's like 8,000, right? 150, we say it's 150, okay, because it's not a whole hundred. So we say 150. And when there's decimal numbers, we say it as decimal. So 28 decimal power 5. Okay, so that is like just like normal numbers. And then you got altitude, right? There's 2 parts of altitude. There's firstly like above sea level altitude. So we say that by thousands plus hundreds of feet. So we use the unit feet. Don't use meters for whatever reason. Why would you use that? But also, like all the altimeter and stuff, they use feet, so that's why we use feet. And also, we just round it to the nearest hundreds. Okay, so for example, 2,800 feet, we say 2,800. And also, there's another way of saying altitude that's called flight level. That's usually like reserved for more commercial flights that fly really high, because like they fly really high. So flight level basically means, so for example, this is a flight level 375, right? So flight level 375, that means that is actually 37,500 feet. Okay, so there's like 2 hidden zeros here. Okay, so that's how to read flight levels. Next up is aircraft type numbers, a specific number given to that model of aircraft. So NATO just kind of like NATO? No, sorry, ICAO. I don't know why I said NATO. I must have been reading the news too much. ICAO. ICAO gives out specific numbers to each model of aircraft. So, for example, Flight 498 is Flight Flower 908, right? So that is a specific model of flights. Of planes, sorry. And another thing is wind speed and cloud formation heights. So for wind speed, they do it like this. So when you read however you read this, it's wind 270-10. This means that the wind is 270 degrees, 10 knots. Okay, so like the next part, like the parts after the dash, is talking about how strong the wind is, and the first like group of numbers is talking about the degrees, so like the heading of the wind, right? And that's how you do winds. And for clouds, you do it a bit differently. You do it as, because like when you see this, okay, let's just say this 36 BKN. So BKN, I don't know if you know this, but BKN stands for broken. That is referring back to how you define how much clouds there are. So for broken, that means it is from 5 to 7 octas. So octas are basically like a system of counting clouds that, depending on like how much clouds there is in the sky. So basically you got the sky, you separate it into 8 parts. So if it is no clouds at all, it is SKC, sky clear. The next one is few. So few would be from anywhere that is like more than 0 all the way up to 2 octas. Okay, so I guess like 1 to 2 octas, or like 0.1 to 2 octas, but they always give it in full numbers. So I guess like 1 to 2 octas, that would be few. And then you got scattered, which is 3 to 4 octas. And then you got broken here. Broken is talking about 5 to 7 octas. And then finally you got overcast, which is 8 octas. Okay, so here it's calling broken, so it is around 5 to 7 octaves of clouds, so quite a bit of clouds. And also it is at the altitude of 36. So 36 is referring to 3600, okay? So we read it as 3600 broken. So 3600 is feet, by the way. Yeah, and also another thing to deal with numbers. There's so much numbers in aviation. Another group of numbers is aircraft headings. So we do aircraft headings in group of 3 digits. So the first one, as an example, is 005 degrees. We would read that as heading 005. Okay. Another example is 350 degrees. We read that as heading 350. And finally, you got aerodrome elevation. So maybe sometimes like the aerodrome is not exactly like at sea level, right? Like a lot of them are like in like up in the hill or something. Like there are certain aerodromes are not just like on the sea. So we have an expression as like field elevation. It is like the aerodrome elevation. We express it in feet. So maybe the aerodrome elevation is 178. So we would say field elevation 178. 4,900. We would say field elevation 4,900. 900. Right. So that's how you do aerodrome elevations, or also known as field elevations. And that concludes teaching point 2. Now you go through to teaching point 3, explaining operating procedures. So obviously we don't say slang terms when you're talking over the radio. We are like professional, right? Like we're trying to we're pilots and ATC controllers, right? Like air traffic controllers. We are professionals here. We're not saying 10-4, over and out, come in please. Like no one says that, okay? So these are the list. We got 2 tables. The first is this table. So a couple things here. We're just gonna go over the list, right? Acknowledge is just like, let me know that you have received this and understood this message. So like maybe the ATC would ask you, please acknowledge that you've read this message. So another thing is affirmative. Affirmative literally just means yes or permission granted. So if you are the pilot and you say affirmative, it's probably more likely to mean yes. And if you're the ATC and someone like a pilot asks you, can we still fly heading 250? And then you can say affirmative to say permission granted or yes. Like honestly, it is kind of blurry, but like, you know, like the meaning is pretty similar anyways. And then you got cleared. So authorized to proceed. This is most likely to be used for maybe like flight Cessna 152 Golf Sierra Foxtrot. You are cleared to land on runway 23, for example. That's an example. So you're cleared to do something. That means that you're authorized to proceed. You're cleared to take off. You're cleared to land. Yeah, those are examples of cleared. Correction. So correction is basically correcting a previous mistake. So it's used like this. So maybe you say you're cleared to land on runway 23. Correction, runway 25. So it is just basically after you say something wrong, you say correction and then you say the correct thing. Okay, so I say again basically means that I will repeat. So maybe you say as in the ATC you say you're cleared to land on runway 05, runway 05, and the pilot asks you to say again, and then you will say I say again, you're cleared to land on runway 05. So that's just literally that's just like as a starting word to show that you're about to repeat something that you have just said. So negative is no, pretty self-explanatory. Next group of tables, here is out. So out is basically, out and over is kind of like brothers, I would say. Out basically means end of transmission and no reply needed. So this is usually means that like the entire conversation has ended. I don't need to talk to you anymore. Cessna 152 Golf Foxtrot Romeo out. After your like entire thing. So like maybe like Foxtrot Romeo Golf out. Another thing is over. So over is after you say the entire your part of the conversation, but you still needs a reply from your like the other side of the radio. You need a reply, so you'll say like after your message you'll say over to like ask for a reply. Another one is Roger. Roger is basically I have received all your transmission. It's basically another way to say okay. Right? There is no it doesn't say that it doesn't mention anything about replies. It's just yeah, I got it. You know? And some people I've seen online, apparently some people thought this Roger was a guy. I don't know why they would think that. No, it is actually like a military or radio term. And standby basically just literally means wait. I mean, this is a pretty common word anyways. So, okay, this is not a common word. Silence. So silence basically means silence is imposed due to emergency. Okay, so whenever there is a mayday or a pan whatever, the ATC will like say silence, and then you are not supposed to say anything unless you also have an emergency. And after the emergency, the ATC will say silence fini, which means that the emergency has ended, silence is lifted. Okay, so now you can continue your like normal communications again. Next up, you got Wilco. Wilco is basically instructions received, understood, and will be complied with. So Wilco is like short for will comply. So you can remember that like that. Okay, so next up is call signs. So call signs for Canadian specific. So first letter is always C because of Canadian. C and then dash, and then there's a number. This first letter always starts with G or F. Okay, so unless you're in an ultralight plane, one of those like really weird small planes things, those start with L. Okay, so like if you're just flying like your normal Cessna or any commercial flights, it will be starting with G or F at like this digit. And for initial contact, you'll tell the ATC your type of aircraft plus all the 4 letters back here. You don't need to start with the C, but you do need to say these 4 letters. And then after all further communications, you just need the last 3 digits, the last 3 letters. So an example of this would be Cessna 172 GFLR. You would say yourself as Cessna 172 Golf Foxtrot Lima Romeo. Right, that would be how you address yourself. And then afterwards, like for further communications, you would just say Foxtrot Lima Romeo. Right, pretty simple. And for ground stations, they also have their own call signs. It's basically a combination of location and function. So for example, you got surface movement control at Toronto, so you call that Toronto ground. Pretty self-explanatory, is at Toronto, and it is a ground. Surface movement control, we call that ground, so Toronto ground. Another one is flight information service stations at Winnipeg, so we can call that Winnipeg information. Right, again, pretty self-explanatory. Okay, last teaching point. Teaching point 4, explain calling procedures. So basically when you call whoever, you say the call sign of the target, and then you say this is, and then your call sign, and then the frequency you're on, and then you say over. Okay, so an example of this would be Ottawa Tower, this is Cessna 172 Foxtrot Alpha Delta Tango on frequency 118.7 over. Right, that would be an example of how you call radio to Ottawa Tower as Cessna 172 Foxtrot Alpha Delta Tango. So after giving that, Ottawa Tower will give you a response. Cessna 172 Foxtrot Alpha Delta Tango. This is Ottawa Tower, go ahead. So this is just them acknowledging, yeah, I got your message. Please continue with your actual message, right? Because this isn't really a message. So this is just like an initiation. So message handling procedures. So there's a few things that are just kind of like tips in general that you should be doing. So firstly, you should plan the message content before transmitting. So you should think about what you want to say before actually saying it. More so, not just like in general in life, but especially in the radio scenario, because especially for more crowded radio places, like such as like big airports, like near big airports, there would be a lot of radio chatter. So you don't want to be just like holding the line and just thinking of what to say. So just plan out what you want to say before you actually say it. Another thing is, listen briefly before transmitting the message to avoid interfering with other transmissions. So this is basically just meaning listen in, make sure no one is speaking before you start speaking, right? Pretty self-explanatory. Don't speak like over each other, like that would cause problems for obvious reasons. And finally, deliver the radio messages clearly and concisely using standard phrases. So we just talked about like the terms like don't use over and out, don't use 10-4. If you use those, people will like, like look at you weird. they're like, it is obviously very unprofessional to say those words, so don't do them, okay? We are trying to be professional people here, okay? So don't do that. And format of the conversation usually goes a bit like this. So the call sign indicating the addressee and the originator. So that, like the whole thing we just went through. And then the addressee replies saying like Ottawa, Cessna, whatever the example was, this is Ottawa Tower, go ahead. That is the addressee reply. And then you got the actual message, whatever the message is. Maybe it's like we want to go and land on, we want to land on runway, whatever. Whatever the situation is, say your message. And then finally, probably the ATC, but like whichever side that isn't, like the addressee will acknowledge it, and then you would probably acknowledge it again, and then you would say blah blah blah, whoever you are, and then out to end the conversation, right? So that's basically how you do radio conversations, right? And that's the end of this video. Thanks to Slides Go for making this PowerPoint so beautiful. And that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found it useful, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. I do a lot of these aviation and leadership related videos, and if you find those interesting, make sure to like and subscribe. and I'll see you in the next video.